afternoon, Hartford, and welcome to another session of Voices for Veterans, which is put on by Hartford Public Access Television with the help of two veterans, Steve Fournier, an Air Force veteran, and myself, Dave Yano, a combat veteran of Vietnam. And we're happy to be here today we have a guest, but before I introduce my guest that's on the show with me, I want to do a little PSA here, public service announcement. The 4th Annual Connecticut Peace Conference is entitled Retooling the War Economy, How We Can Build Good Green Jobs and Infrastructure for Human Needs. And Code Pink co-founder Media Benjamin will be there. It's going to be at Middlesex Community College at Chapman Hall, Saturday, November 9th, 12 p.m. to 4 p.m., free and open to all, and lunch will be provided. Information can be gathered at SK Revisky, that's REVISKY, at mxcc.edu. Phone number, if you wish to call, is 860-759-3699. And it's sponsored by the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition, along with Chapter 42 of Veterans for Peace from Central Connecticut, and also Vietnam Veterans Against the War, of which I am still a member. And today I have a guest, and my guest is Christopher Dussault from the Hartford Catholic Workers Organization on Clark Street. And we're going to have an open discussion here about some of the issues and things that we feel are going on with America overseas. And while myself was served as a combat veteran in Vietnam, Chris went over to Palestine and to Iraq during the war years to look at what the actual might of the United States was doing to the people of Palestine and Iraq. And so I would like to invite Chris to give us an overview of some of the things that he experienced and saw when he went overseas.
Well, Dave, before I share with folks that story we were discussing beforehand about one of my times in Palestine, it's so important for veterans to be speaking about their experiences in war, because I'm not sure many Americans truly understand what it's like to be at war. By and large, very few Americans have been to war or have lived through war or have even had family members be sent off to war. And I think that has made us cavalier in our willingness to use war and weapons to settle our conflicts. I've been in a number of conflict zones. The first war zone I was in Bosnia back in 1993 during the Civil War. We made it to the front lines, and we were so close to mortar rounds going off that the blast would make our clothes move. And the feeling of that, the visceral feeling of that, the way it goes inside of you, the smell of it, the sight of people running for their lives, the sound of automatic weapon fire as the guys run past you, the visual of buildings with all the windows blown out and pockmarks in the concrete from all of the rounds that have hit them. That is something that Americans, we just don't know. Wars, by and large, aren't fought on our soil. And, if we stopped for a minute and just maybe listened to more of our veterans about the experiences they've had, the things they've seen, maybe we would pause and think twice before we continue spending in excess of $9,000 a second, every second since 2001.
I know, it's incredible when you think about you think about the money cost of the war, but I also, and just to your point about what it feels like to be in a war zone, people don't understand what it feels like for veterans, and we're the ones inflicting the damage on the people that we're supposed to be helping, and we don't even understand what that's done to them. And your description just brings back so many memories of me when I was under fire, and when I heard for the first time artillery shells from a 16-inch gun going over my head into the jungle somewhere, and not realizing what that would do to human flesh.
Yeah.
You know, and what it would do to their land. And this, I think, is the biggest point that turned me around when I came back from Vietnam, was the fact that we're on someone else's ground doing all this damage on their ground that we have never felt what it feels like.
Yeah, and you know, it's time to put away the weapons. You know, we have better ways. We're more evolved than that. You know, we can figure things out. And so earlier you had asked me to share a story from one of my trips to Palestine and Israel. It was back maybe 7 or 8 years ago now with my younger son Ammon. We went to the Palestinian village of Belin at the invitation of Iyad Bernat. Belin had been actively resisting the wall that Israel has been building for the last 15, 20 years that is cutting off Palestinians from their own land. The route the wall has taken, Israel calls it a security wall, other folks call it an apartheid wall. It's really a land grab wall and a water grab wall. The route that the wall has taken very often cuts off Palestinian villages from their pasture land. And that was the case for the people of Belin. The wall was going to deny them access to the land where their goats could graze and where their olive trees were growing.
And this is land that's been in their families for generations.
Generations. The olive trees, some of these olive trees are more than 1,000, some are 2,000 years old.
Wow.
And they've been in the same families all that time. And they're uprooted, they're burned, but they're also just cut off from these families. The idea being, if these families are unable to have a livelihood, then perhaps they'll leave Palestine altogether. So Iyad and his villagers have organized weekly demonstrations, nonviolent demonstrations at the wall for years now. And they've asked international folks to join them. And so we did. And the response by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, is really a window into the way that nonviolent activists are often met with. What they would do is first they would shoot tear gas over our heads so that there was a cloud of gas separating us from the village that we had marched down from. Then they would shoot rubber-coated bullets. You know, it's a real misnomer to call them rubber bullets. I'll never do that because they're actual bullets with a thin coat of rubber over them. And they're
deadly, too.
They are deadly. And so they shoot those into the ground so that they'll ricochet off the hard ground or the rocks, and you have no idea where they're going to go, so there's no way to try to take cover from it. But then the last thing they did is they had water cannons. You know, this might sound like some ridiculous thing that you'd never see here. Water cannons have been used here in the States, most notably in 1963 in Birmingham when the fire department was called out to turn water hoses on children that were part of civil rights marches in Birmingham. But the water cannons that were used by the Israeli Defense Forces, they weren't shooting water, they shoot sewage. You can't get the smell off of you. We threw our clothes away, bought new clothes, but we still, I feel for the folks that were on the flight home with us because we couldn't get the stench off of us. And yet, the people of Belin have been nonviolently resisting this wall for years now. They did win one battle. They filed a lawsuit in the Israeli Supreme Court, did order the wall moved, rerouted a little bit. But these folks want the wall gone altogether. They don't want any more of their land taken from them. Yeah, that's just one story from being out there. You know, these tactics that are used against nonviolent folks are widespread. And a couple of other tactics to be aware of is the use of agent provocateurs. When we see media coverage of demonstrations, and you'll sometimes see the language with a demonstration turned violent. You know, read that carefully and ask, you know, what sort of bias or perspective might be in the reporting. Oftentimes, the violence is the violence of law enforcement being used against the demonstrators. Other times, it's violence that is undertaken by agent provocateurs. You know, representatives of corporations and of the government have infiltrated nonviolent movements forever in this country.
Ever since the 60s, right.
You know, in more recent times, the DAPL demonstrations against the Dakota Access Pipeline project out in the Dakotas. My wife Jackie was out there a few years back, and Brian too, another member of our community, working with Native Americans trying to resist the building of that pipeline, which just leaked. And at one point, a man with an assault rifle showed up trying to insert himself into the demonstrations, into the group of people resisting the pipeline, as a way of trying to besmirch their legitimacy and show that they weren't a nonviolent group if they had these weapons on them. But you know, the folks saw that he had a security badge from DAPL, that he was working for them. It was an effort to try and discredit them. You know, so you know, these types of tactics are widely used against nonviolent groups. You know, another one, you know, back in the day, the charge of communism would be leveled at activists. Dr. King, we remember him fondly today. Everybody, left, right, center, thinks great things of Dr. King. That wasn't the case back when he was active and alive and going to jail. He was besmirched as a communist. The FBI sent him the infamous suicide letter, telling him that he needed to commit suicide before he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, or else they were going to reveal to his wife that he was not being faithful in their marriage.
They tried to blackmail him. They tried to do everything to quiet his voice.
Right. So the charge of communism doesn't resonate today. You know, and folks old enough will remember what it would mean to be called a communist. You know, it would cost you your career. It would cost you friends and family. It would, make your opinions outside the bounds of accepted discourse in America. Well, they don't call you communist anymore. Now they call you a terrorist. Or a suspected terrorist, or an alleged terrorist. And it's not that terrorism isn't a real threat. It's not that there aren't real terrorists out there. But be very careful when they start calling you a terrorist. Laws are being passed now that are calling anti-pipeline activists terrorists. Laws are being passed for folks that are going undercover to investigate factory farms, terrorists. The Catholic worker, we've been investigated by the FBI, and the DOJ justified the investigation on the grounds that we were potential domestic terrorists. And
that you would be supporting terrorism in some way, shape, or form. Veterans for Peace was also put on the list of possibly terrorist-supporting activity, yes.
So, we need to be mindful of these things. In an age when we seem to have shut down critical thinking, it's worrisome.
It is.
You undermine a democracy by undermining public education, by undermining a free press, and by shutting down critical thinking. And so you can believe that real news is fake news. You can believe that fake news is real news. And you can believe that nonviolent activists are terrorists. It's a frightening time in many ways these days.
It is, because if they shut down the voice of the American people and they can redirect it in a way that supports them, they will try to do that. They will try to quiet us, and that's what they're really trying to do. They want to quiet us because I think that they do fear us. They do fear the fact that we're not afraid to speak up and do things like this program, or go like you guys do in front of the federal building, or like Cal does, his vigil down there alone, all by himself. In fact, some of the ways of resisting are like myself. I fly the American flag reversed in front of my house every day as a sign of it's a distress call. People have stopped to ask me, why is the flag flying like that? It's to tell you that I'm in a state of distress. The entire country's in a state of distress. And I think it's been, when you go and visit a country and come back with actual statements of what you saw and did, it's like the veterans and myself who stand up. We've been in the war zone. We know what happens, and we're trying to overcome our indoctrination, that the way we've been indoctrinated and conditioned all these years. And they're fearful of that because we have immense credibility.
Yes.
And that's, I think, is so important.
Veterans are an important voice. We need to listen to them. You know, we need to challenge the dominant ideas that are circulating in society. We need to hear voices of people that are living in the margins of our society. You know, Black Lives Matter, also investigated as potential domestic terrorists. And what's their terrorism? They're offering an alternative perspective of what's going on in our country, a voice that's not represented, but needs to be heard. It's a frightening time.
It is, because law enforcement has gotten to the point where they feel that they're in a state of war with the American people, and that's not what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, well, you know, the Pentagon program to sell surplus weapons and hardware to local law enforcement agencies. You know, at one point, the Los Angeles School District's police force had a grenade launcher and an armored personnel carrier.
Oh, my goodness.
You know, when the police are militarized, what does that do? It presumes that the people are now the enemy, and you know, that's certainly the experience of many people in the inner city, that the police, unfortunately, are not there to protect and serve them. They're an occupying force, and the people are seen as the enemy. So, you know, it's election day today when we're speaking, and I know it'll be after the election when folks see this, but it won't be too late for them to be casting their vote. You know, we have reduced democracy to a once or twice a year activity of casting a ballot, typically for the lesser of two evils. When in reality, democracy is something that we need to be participating in every day.
Yes.
We vote with our feet, we vote with our wallets, we vote with our lives. And if we had a vibrant participatory democracy, then the voice of the people would be heard more clearly. You know, we need to be showing up at the Zoning Board of Appeal meetings. We need to be showing up at the PTA meetings. We need to be marching in the streets. We need to be reading alternative media. We also need to be reading mainstream media. You know, throughout the 90s, when the United States was bombing Iraq 2 or 3 times a week, during the time when we were allegedly not at war with them, most Americans had little awareness that this was the case. Yet it was covered in the New York Times. You know, we need to read.
Yeah, and the thing is, they became very smart in the way they projected the information, because I can remember, and you probably can remember too, and Steve and I have talked about this before, during the Vietnam War, Walter Cronkite came on the 6 o'clock news every night to inform the American people how many casualties there were in Vietnam that day and that night. So it was inescapable. The American people could not escape from it. But then they brought in this thing where they embedded journalists with the so-called troops, and those embedded journalists would only see and hear what they were told to see and hear by the minders, the officers who did all that. And
which is what Iraq did. When I would go to Iraq, we would have minders there. You didn't think we'd have minders here in America.
And then the fact that they can do that lets them manipulate the information to the point where the American people feel that, oh, everything's being done correctly. One of the things that aggravated me in particular was the fact that there were no casualty lists every day on how many American GIs were dying in Afghanistan and Iraq. So what I would do, Chris, is I would go to every city council meeting, public portion, and every Board of Ed meeting, and I would get the list from online, from icasualties.org, and I would read the names of every American soldier that had died that day. I just wish that I could have had the names of all the Iraqi and Afghan people, because the numbers on their side are so much more.
And that's voting with your life, Dave,
yes.
Right? That's participating in our democracy in a way that extends far beyond the vote. You know, sure, absolutely, get out and vote, folks. But you know, we need to be doing more than voting. Absolutely.
And part of what we're doing here is we're telling the story, and that's what's important. You would be amazed at how many people actually pay attention to small programming like this when they get a chance to see it, when it's made available to them, you know. But it has to be made available. And if you know that there's a way to get out there and speak and to do that, then take advantage of it, like you were saying. This is part of the democracy. This is part, like, your newsletter that I get, that you send to me every month. I treasure that because it spiritually keeps me awake on what good people are doing out there. And they're, like, even when you were talking about the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, I know that there is a group in Israel called the Courage to Resist,
Yes.
which are Israeli veterans who have said no more beyond the green line. And they have taken a stand themselves over there. And I know there are Israelis who have taken a stand against the war.
And the refuseniks, the young people that are refusing to be drafted or to fulfill their service to begin with in the Israeli Defense Forces. And there is a vibrant peace movement in Israel. And then there are groups like the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. It's one of the tactics that the Israeli Defense Forces uses is they go to homes of so-called terrorists. Again, they use that term very loosely, and they demolish the home. Or if the person is living there as a guest, but it's not even their home, they demolish that home. And so there's a group, Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, that is supported also by rabbis for human rights. They go and they surround those homes to try and prevent them from being demolished, to try and prevent the family from becoming homeless, right? That's participating. We need to participate in our democracy.
And you don't have to necessarily pick up a weapon to fight back. You may be amazed at the fact that something as simple as this television program can be a useful way to combat the war machine that has so taken over the United States. I mean, this president that we have today talks about ending the endless wars, and he wants to bring the troops home, all right? But he really doesn't, he's not serious about it, because when he takes the troops out of Syria and puts them in Saudi Arabia, he's not really bringing anybody home.
And it looks like there might not end up being a net reduction of American troops in Syria. It's looking now like they were simply redeployed. To give Turkey access to putting down the Kurds, and these troops have been redeployed to an oil field, unfortunately. But I also think it would be a mistake to think that because it's a Republican president that we have these issues and think that they don't take place under Democratic presidents as well. President Obama, beloved by liberals and leftist center people in America, and we gave him a free pass. The wars were fought for his entire presidency.
Yes.
People were held in Guantanamo, some without charge, without charge for the duration of his presidency. And on at least 2 occasions, he authorized the assassination of American citizens overseas. Folks, you can Google that and look it up.
Yes. I mean, as much as I would like to think that Obama was working towards ending the wars, he did not make the moves that would have shown that. He should have just stood down the troops and brought them home, irregardless of what was going on, and of what the generals said. And now it's so funny to have the Democrats all of a sudden talking about we need to stop the Russians from doing this. We need to not surrender our influence over the geopolitical sphere. So we're coming to the end of the show here. We just received the high sign, and I just want to thank my friend and my colleague Christopher and the Hartford Catholic Worker for showing up here and participating in our democracy. And so we want to thank our people who are viewing, and we want to let you know that we will continue to work towards peace and to revitalize Americans to the fact that they are a free country and that they can bring an end to these endless wars.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for being here. And just remember, we're having the conference in Middlesex Community College on November 9th, and don't forget to vote in all of your elections that are upcoming.
I'll be true to you.